2,000 subscribers? Is this going to be a monthly thing from now on? I mean, I was surprised that I was able to reach 1,000 subscribers not too long after reaching 500 subscribers, but now I've doubled that many subs in such a short amount of time. Honestly, the rate in which my channel is growing, it's really rather overwhelming, and every day I'm finding it harder and harder to believe that over 2,000 people love the videos I make. In fact, at the time of this recording, I have 2,450 subscribers, and to all those people, once again, I say thank you. Thank you so much for constantly showing your support for this channel. Without all of you, I wouldn't be in the position I am now, and I can go on and on trying to describe how much it means to me, but words cannot do it justice, and the only thing that will show how much I appreciate every single one of my subscribers is a Fire Emblem video. Now, Fire Emblem has been around since the days of the NES. However, gamers in the Western world weren't made aware of the Fire Emblem series until the appearance of Marth and Roy in Super Smash Bros. Melee, as well as the release of Fire Emblem on the Game Boy Advance, also known as Fire Emblem Blazing Sword. This was when the Western world was introduced to the Fire Emblem series, and Blazing Sword was our first taste of what the series had to offer, along with Fire Emblem Sacred Stones, which came out 1 year later. So to a lot of people, these were their first Fire Emblem games, and it was thanks to these games that the Fire Emblem series really began to make a name for itself. However, there was one more Game Boy Advance Fire Emblem game that never made it overseas, known as Fire Emblem The Binding Blade, or in some cases, The Sword of Seals. This was the true first Fire Emblem game on the Game Boy Advance, and the appearance of Roy in Smash Bros. Melee was used to promote this game. In fact, Blazing Sword was a prequel to this game. For the longest time, many players wouldn't be able to experience this game. However, thanks to the hard work and dedication of many fans, this and many other Fire Emblem games have been translated into English for the rest of the world to enjoy. And I just want to say thank you to the YouTube user Lucas Canuto for sending me the English ROM of Binding Blade. You're awesome, dude, thank you so much. Now, each of these games are often held as some of the best games on the Game Boy Advance, and damn right they are, as well as some of the best games in the Fire Emblem series. But which of the three is the best? Well, that's why we're here today, as I celebrate my 2,000 subscriber special by having the 3 Fire Emblem Game Boy Advance games go head to head in order to see which of them is worthy of the legendary title of Fire Emblem. Unlike the previous 2 episodes of 3FORALL, this time around I'm going to be judging these games on 8 different categories: story, characters and supports, gameplay and level design, graphics and art style, music or soundtrack, boss battles, difficulty, and finally, replay value. The reason I've decided to make story and character separate categories for this episode is because the main focus of Fire Emblem has always been its story and characters, and as such, both of these fields are very in-depth and I have a lot to cover, so I felt it was best to judge them separately rather than as one thing, since there's so much to cover in regards to all these 3. I'll state right off the bat that being Fire Emblem games, these 3 are all stellar RPGs and are definitely worth your time if you're a fan of RPGs and are interested in the Fire Emblem series as a whole. But that's not why we're here today, since all that matters is which of the 3 is the best of the best, and oh man do I have a lot to say about these games. And with all that cleared up, wipe your screens and get some AA batteries, because the GBA Fire Emblem games are ready to roll, and by the power of the Sacred Stones, remove the sword from the seals and become the Blazing Sword once more! Let's just begin, shall we? Now, being Fire Emblem games, all of these games have very interesting and in-depth stories. They may not be the best stories in video game history, but they'll definitely hold your attention and leave an impact on you. Now, I'm going to begin with Blazing Sword's story analysis, since even though Binding Blade came out first, Blazing Sword is a prequel and builds up to the events of Binding Blade while telling its own story. Fire Emblem Blazing Sword's story is told from the perspective of 3 different lords, Lyn, Eliwood, and Hector, as each of these characters have their own campaign you can follow on each playthrough. The overarching story doesn't change in the grand scheme of things, but each route lets you experience the story from a different perspective, as well as getting further character development for each of the main lords. The story begins in Lyn's route, where the player character, or avatar, awakes in Lyn's house, as he or she was unconscious before Lyn found you on the ground, kinda like a certain other Fire Emblem game. Anyway, after the 2 are attacked by bandits, Lyn then explains that her clan was murdered by bandits, and she is one of the few left alive. And so the tactician and Lyn travel together in order to avenge her tribe. Along the way, Lyn runs into Kent and Sain, two knights who explain to her that she is the granddaughter of Lord Helson, the Marquis of Caellan. After hearing the news, Lyn's new goal is to be reunited with her family. Along the way, she runs into the siblings Niels and Ninian, who are being pursued by a group known as the Black Fang, who she rescues along with the help of Lord Eliwood. With their help, Lyn defeats the people threatening her grandfather's castle, and Lyn lives happily with her grandfather, until 1 year later. This is where Eliwood's story comes into play and is the main story throughout the game. Eliwood's story revolves around him searching for his father, who has been missing for quite some time now. Along the way, he meets up with his best friend Hector, and further down the road he meets up with Lyn after the two rescue her from the assault by the Black Fang. Afterwards, they all decide to team up and they accompany Eliwood to find his father and learn more about this mysterious Black Fang. Along the way, the group run into Ninian again, who has lost her memory, as well as discovering that the person behind these events is a sorcerer known as Nagal, who plans to bring the dragons back into the world. However, Eliwood's father sacrifices himself to prevent the summoning and delay Nagal for the time being. Helpless to fight against him at first, the group decide to seek out Athos, the living legend, who helped defeat the dragons years ago, and from then on out, the group travels across the entire continent in order to become stronger and find a way to defeat Nagal and prevent the summoning of the dragons. That's the main story, and Hector's campaign doesn't offer anything new in the grand scheme of things, but it does offer a lot more character development for Hector along with his relationship with his brother. Fire Emblem Binding Blade takes place 20 years after Blazing Sword, with our main character being Roy, the son of Eliwood. The game begins with the country of Bern declaring war on all the other countries across the continent, being led by the king of Bern, Zephiel. In fact, they even go so far as to defeat Sayaka and Ilia, since Bern is the strongest military power in the continent of Elibe. At the beginning of the game, Roy is called back home in order to lead the charge against Bern, as his father is too sick to fight. At the same time, Lilina, the daughter of Hector, goes back to Ostia in order to keep the peace during her father's absence, as he has gone to confront Bern head-on. As the game goes on, Roy eventually runs into Princess Guinevere, who wishes to meet with the Lycian leaders in order to resolve this conflict peacefully, and as such, Roy makes it his goal to escort her there. Eventually, the group discovers that the reason for Bern's sudden power surge is due to the fact that Zephiel found a way to bring back the dragons and is using them to win this war. The only way to stop him is to find the 8 weapons used by the 8 legends during the Scouring, a war between mankind and the dragons that took place over 1,000 years ago, and use them to defeat Bern and return peace to the world. From then on out, the story follows Roy and Lenina as they search for the sacred weapons, find out more about the dragons, and put a stop to the armies of Bern and King Zephiel. Fire Emblem Sacred Stones takes place in the continent of Magville and begins with the country of Grado declaring war on the other countries, in particular the country of Renias. The story then cuts to our main character, Princess Erica, who is being escorted out of the castle by her knight Seth, but sadly having to leave her father behind. During their escape, Seth is injured by Valter, one of the generals of Grado, and Erica must fight for herself in her first true battle. After the ordeal is over, Erica, despite being rather shaken up by all this, decides to take back her kingdom despite her major disadvantage in order to keep her country safe and to carry on the legacy of her fallen father. Along the way, she meets many new faces and friends, but on the other side of the spectrum, her brother Ephraim is causing havoc in the Grado territory in order to weaken their army strength and morale. However, this is cut short and he is forced to flee thanks to Valter. Eventually the two meet up and take back their kingdom. After celebrating, the two decide to split up and take on the Grado Empire in order to help out the other nations and to stop Grado from achieving their main goal of destroying the sacred stones. Both Erica and Ephraim have story events and chapters tied to each of their routes that shed further light on key events in the story, like Erica's quest to Johanna and Ephraim's journey across the seas, but eventually they join back up and now they have a new goal in mind. They must save their friend Lion, who is the son of the King of Grado and is currently the one instigating this war. However, many flashbacks show that Lion is a very kind-hearted and gentle person who would never agree to any form of war. It turns out that Lion is being corrupted by the Darkstone, which holds the Demon King trapped within it, and the Demon King is the reason for this war in the first place. As such, Ephraim and Erica face their hardest challenge yet, not having to fight the Demon King, but having to fight their closest and dearest friend. All of these games have really good stories, and it's easy to become very invested in them for both enjoyment and emotional reasons. Concerning which story is the best, well, it's a close call, but I find Blazing Sword to have the best story. The story of Blazing Sword is very simple to understand and easy to follow in the beginning, but as the game progresses, so much more about the world and its history is discovered, which makes the story at large seem so much more daunting and epic than when the game started out. The story is also structured expertly, since most of the game is broken up into various arcs that follow certain characters or key events. For example, Lynn's arc at the beginning, finding Leeward's father, the journey into Bern, as well as Nino and Jafar's arc. All of these arcs are great stories in their own right, yet they never disrupt the pace of the story at large, but rather build on the foundations and really flesh out this world and its characters. Also, because this game lets you experience the story from 3 different lords, each campaign adds further character development to certain characters and fleshes out certain elements of the game's story, further expanding the lore and history surrounding the game. Not to mention, the story is just really interesting and fun to experience, and you really feel that these characters are more than just pixels in a game, but that they're real people, and as a whole, Blazing Sword has a really simple story that everyone can get behind, but it has much more depth to it if you explore deep enough, and out of the 3, it left the biggest impact on me. Not to mention that even though you don't need to play Binding Blade to understand what this game is leading up to, Blazing Sword does a fantastic job at subtly foreshadowing the events to come, in particular with Hector's story and the events surrounding Zephyr and Guinevere. Sacred Stones comes in second, since even though the main story is pretty simple, the journey itself feels very personal when concerning Erica, Ephraim and Lion, since this war has not only caused Ephraim and Erica to lose their father and their kingdom, but they were also separated from each other at the time and each of them fear the worst. Despite this, they both understand their roles as lords and must fight against such great odds in order to save those who look up to them. Not only that, but after discovering what happened to Lion and the discovery of the Demon King, the struggle only becomes worse since Lion is trying his hardest to resist, but to no avail, and the two of them have to defeat him in order to prevent a great catastrophe. But whenever there's a flashback showing Ephraim, Erica and Lion, you can see how much they mean to him and he to them. Having to fight against someone that dear to you and against their own will is heartbreaking to the two, and as the story goes on, it only gets worse and worse as the corruption continues to grow within Lion, and both Ephraim and Erica are finding the reality of the situation even more difficult to comprehend. Sacred Stones is also a much more character-driven story, since many characters like Cormag, Joshua, Innes, Tana and Larachelle get quite a bit of screen time and small arcs dedicated to them. This may seem underwhelming, but I feel the story connects you on a more emotional level and it really tugs at your heartstrings during its more emotional moments. Binding Blade comes in last since the story in Binding Blade is very basic and by the numbers. I mean, it's a simple and straightforward story, and as a whole it's a fun ride from start to finish. But for a series like Fire Emblem, where story is always such a big thing and something the series excels at, it's rather underwhelming. I mean, it's by no means a bad story, it's just okay. I mean, there are some emotional moments throughout the story, and the backstory revealed about the Scouring, the dragons and all that other stuff is cool. But the journey itself is very much a case of stop Bern, stop the dragons, the end. This isn't even a case of the story not building on Blazing Sword since this came out first. I just find the story not to be as good as the other two. I mean, I've seen worse stories in other Fire Emblem games, but out of the 3 GBA games, I think this one has the weakest story since it's just so straightforward and by the book, it fails to stand out too much. However, I will compliment Binding Blade on something I felt it did very well in this game, and it's the theme of moral grey concerning the war with Bern. Fire Emblem has always done a great job at showing that war is a case of moral grey rather than just good guys versus bad guys, and I feel Binding Blade is one of the best examples of this, since there are many times where the game will show how the soldiers of Bern feel about this war as well as where their loyalties lie. Not to mention, you really feel a sense of chivalry and pride within Bern, since a lot of the best soldiers never abandon the people they serve despite their own personal bias, and all of them fight and die with pride in their hearts. Characters like Milady turn on her country of Bern in order to fight along Princess Guinevere, who she has sworn herself to. And even when she is confronted by the other generals, they understand her reasoning and respect her decision without any hatred or abhorrence for her, which shows that the soldiers of Bern aren't evil, but rather they fight for their beliefs and the ones they believe in. So in the end, they've all got strong stories, but the winner of this round is Fire Emblem Blazing Sword. Okay people, this part is going to be quite the beefer, since there's a lot to discuss concerning the characters and supports of all 3 of these games. How this will work is that first I will be discussing the lords, then the side characters, then the villains, and finally the support conversations. And for each segment, I'll rank each of the entries accordingly and see which one is the best overall at the end. So starting off with lords, personally I think Blazing Sword is the best, since the game has 3 lords whose stories you follow, and each of them are very well developed and likeable characters, as well as great units on the battlefield. Out of the 3, Lyn is my favourite, since I find her to be the most engaging and complex character. Not to mention, she is a monster on the battlefield and becomes an absolute beast when she becomes a Great Lord. Eliwood follows closely behind, since he's an all-around great character and is easily the most developed out of the 3. Not to mention, he's an all-around strong and reliable unit who admittedly doesn't have any major strengths but no major weaknesses either. Hector is my least favourite of the lords, since I think he's the weakest character, but I still really like him and his storyline does add a lot more depth to him. Though I will say, Hector is easily the best unit on the battlefield, thanks to his ridiculous raw power that lets him pretty much one-shot everything. Sacred Stones comes in second, since even though Erica is easily my favourite lord in Fire Emblem, since I find her to be the most interesting and engaging character as well as the most likeable lord in the series, in fact I ranked her as my favourite lord in Fire Emblem, despite her not being the strongest unit on the battlefield, Ephraim isn't as strong as either Lyn, Eliwood or Hector. Not to say he's a bad lord or anything, oh no, I like Ephraim, don't get me wrong, and he certainly is a well fleshed out and developed character, but he's not the most engaging or interesting character when compared to the other Fire Emblem lords. Though I will say that like Hector, Ephraim is an absolute beast on the battlefield and is one of the strongest lords in the Fire Emblem series. Binding Blade comes in last, since personally I don't consider Lilina a lord, so all that's left is Roy. And Roy is just okay. Seriously, he's just okay. I mean, he's by no means a bad character, but like the story, he's very by the numbers and rather simple, since he doesn't change much and go through any major development throughout the story. I mean, he's a kind-hearted youth who always goes out of his way to help those in need and those he cares about despite the danger that comes with it. So he certainly lives up to the legacy of being a Fire Emblem lord. However, Roy pretty much stays that way throughout the entire game, and because of this, he's not the most interesting character or someone you really feel a connection to unlike the other lords. Not to mention, Roy isn't even that great of a character gameplay wise, since his stats are all around good, but nothing special, so he fails to be as potent as some of the other units in the game. Also, Roy has extremely late game promotion, which can make using him a bit of a hassle towards the end, since he's the only one who can use the Binding Blade. And if you're wondering if Roy would have made it into top 10 Fire Emblem lords, short answer, no. Concerning the side characters, it's very much a case of second verse same as the first, since once again, I find Blazing Sword to have the best side characters for not only having awesome units on the battlefield, but also really interesting characters to boot. Aside from the obvious characters like Nils, Ninian, Athos, Jafar, and Nino, which are some of the most interesting and unique characters in the game, characters like Oswin, Kent, Sane, Rebecca, Sarah, Urk, Wrath, Matthew, Lucius, Raven, Priscilla, Guy, Canis, Fiora, Heath, Isadora, and Harkin are really good characters with their own stories to tell, as well as being some of the best units I've used in any Fire Emblem game. Seriously, every time I play Blazing Sword, I always have at least 80% of these units on my team, because they're just that awesome. And even the other characters like Pent, Louise, Dart, Lowen, Corel, and Florina, while I don't use them as often, they're still good units in their own right and likeable characters as well. In fact, there isn't a single unit in Blazing Sword I don't like, which is something I sadly cannot say for both Sacred Stones and Binding Blade. The reason for this is that both of these games are very 50-50 when it comes to the side characters, since half of the characters in this game I really like, whereas the other half of them I really don't care for. Personally, I think Sacred Stones is better than Binding Blade when it comes to the side characters, since even though both of these games are 50-50 when it comes to the characters I like and use often, when I find a character in Sacred Stones I really like them. Seriously, some of the characters in Sacred Stones are great characters with really interesting backstories and conversations, as well as being some of the strongest units for the classes they represent, since Seth was my White Knight in shining armor, Gilliam was my man, Franz was my boy, Garcia was a monster, Ross wrecked everyone, Vanessa destroyed all forms of mages, Lute just fucked shit up, Naomi never missed, Colm never took a hit, Natasha was the Uber medic, Joshua sliced everyone to pieces, Tana laid the smacketh downeth like no one else, Ewan was the ultimate druid, Garrick was just plain awesome, Amelia was the lightning general, La Rochelle was the bane of demons everywhere, Serene said fuck you archers, and goddammit, Cormac was just plain badass. So yeah, the units that I liked in Sacred Stones I just plain loved to pieces, but everyone else was just kinda to me. Not to say they're bad or anything, I think Marcia, Tethys and Carl were pretty cool, but no other characters I found myself gushing over constantly. Binding Blade, despite being an similar boat to Sacred Stones with the 50-50 character thing, I didn't find myself loving the characters as much as Sacred Stones. I mean, there are some really good characters in Binding Blade, like Chad, Lou, Rutger, Lot, Deke, Shana, Wendy, Faye, Ray, Fur, and Noah, since they were all really good units and interesting characters. And holy shit, some of the units in that game were amazing. In particular, Lance and Alan, who were my most reliable units in the entire game, Milady, who was a fucking badass Wyvern Lord and then some, Lilina, who despite being a cast cannon, absolutely wrecked all kinds of shit with her magic attacks like no other mage in Fire Emblem, the two nomads Sin and especially Sue, who has now become my favourite nomad. Sorry Raph, but Sue kicked so much ass it wasn't even funny, and she had some very strong supports under her belt. In fact, she may just be my favourite character in Binding Blade. And finally, a shout out to easily the best units in the game, the medics Ellen and Clarine. Why were they the best? Well, aside from the fact that they saved my team on multiple occasions from God knows how many berserk and sleep ailments, once they upgraded into advanced classes, not only were they able to use really strong magic attacks, but somehow they had the highest level of evasiveness in the entire game and dodged everyone who attacked them, even more than Sword Masters, Thieves and Falcon Knights. I don't know how they did it and I don't care. All I know is I love these two so much. Despite all the praise I've given, the rest of the characters are either really uninteresting and underwhelming or just plain suck as units. Isn't that right, Sophia? Not to mention the game had a really nasty habit of throwing new characters at you in almost every chapter, most of which were the same as a lot of classes you already had. I mean, the amount of cavaliers and archers I got throughout the course of the game was just plain ridiculous, and because of it, it's really difficult to care about a lot of these characters, since there are just too many of them to get invested in within the span of around 25 to 26 chapters. Admittedly, both Fire Emblem Path of Radiance and Shadow Dragon have this problem of throwing way too many units at you, so Binding Blade isn't the only game guilty of this trope. Concerning the villains, overall I think Binding Blade has the best villains, since like I mentioned previously, there's a real sense of moral grey within Burn, and that they aren't evil for the sake of being evil, but rather they're rather complex and have a lot of motivations tied to their loyalty and their beliefs. Characters like Murdoch, Brunia and Gale are fighting this war not simply because they want to, but because of their loyalty to Burn and their king. They may not agree with everything going on around them, but they carry on regardless and they never let their personal bias get in the way of them. One of my favourite conversations in Binding Blade is between Gale and Brunia, since Gale was meant to be the third Wyvern General of Burn, but because he wasn't born native to Burn, that position was given to Narcian. Brunia feels that Gale deserves to be a general, but Gale doesn't complain about it, but rather he accepts his position and is grateful for the rank he has, and he continues to serve the king with the utmost loyalty. This really shows that the soldiers of Burn have a sense of honour about them, and they aren't just fighting this war for the hell of it. And of course there's King Zephyl himself, who has become one of my favourite Fire Emblem villains. Seriously, Zephyl is an awesome and rather tragic villain, since the events in Blazing Sword show that Zephyl was pretty much a child prodigy, but all the hatred he got from his father drove him on this path and turned him into the bitter king that he is. Zephyl just has this presence to him that feels like if both Ashnard and Sephiroth from Path of Radiance fused together, since he has the awe and fearful presence of Ashnard, but the calculating and calm nature of Sephiroth, as well as his ultimate goal being rather similar in some regard. Zephyl isn't my favourite Fire Emblem villain. I still think both Lion and the Black Knight are stronger villains, but all the same, Zephyl is awesome. Speaking of Lion, Sacred Stones comes in second, since even though the amount of really good villains is small, they are pretty damn good villains. In particular Lion, of course, Kaliak, Balta and the Demon King. Lion is easily the best villain out of all three GBA games, as he is a very sympathetic character, since whenever there's a flashback of Lion, it shows that he is very kind-hearted and a gentle character, and that he wants to become a strong king for his people. In fact, when Lion begins doing research into the Darkstone, he's actually able to save someone's life with it. However, as time goes on, the stone begins to corrupt Lion, as the stone itself houses the spirit of the Demon King. And thanks to this corruption, Lion declares war on the other countries, and he has to fight his dearest friends despite trying his hardest to resist him. This really makes you feel sorry for Lion, since he never wanted to do any of this intentionally. In fact, his motivations for using the Darkstone were all but good. and yet in the end the stone turned him into the very thing he hated and never wanted to be. The Demon King himself is also a really good villain, as he's more of the manipulative type instead of just being a raging monster, and whenever he takes over Lion's body, he uses it as a way of breaking Erica and Ephraim's morale, as well as playing on their trust and love for Lion. Kaliak and Volta are really good villains too, just for being straight up evil scumbags and loving every second of it. I mean, these two do some pretty awful things during Sacred Stones and are responsible for the death of certain characters, and until you fight them properly, every encounter with them ends up bad for our heroes since they're just too powerful. Blazing Sword comes in last sadly, and this isn't because the villains are bad or anything, in fact they're all really good villains, but none of them are as strong as the major villains in both Binding Blade and Sacred Stones. Nagal is a really good villain and is a constant threat throughout the game, since he shows up very often throughout the game, and every time he does, it spells out trouble in bold letters for our three main heroes. He may not be as interesting or complex as both Lion and Sephiel, but he's definitely an interesting character, especially when concerning his backstory and relationship with Athos, and he really is an evil scumbag at times. Other villains like Lloyd, Linus and Sonya are really good as well, especially Sonya, who is probably the most evil bitch in the entire Fire Emblem series, but overall the villains in Blazing Sword are good, really good, but they're not great. Finally, in regards to the support conversations, once again I have to go with Blazing Sword, since I found it to have the overall strongest set of supports out of all three games, since many characters got really good support conversations that helped a lot when it came to fleshing out their backstory or just developing them further. Some of my personal favourites are Jafar's supports with both Nino and Matthew, Harkin and Isadora's support, Lyn and Raph's support, Raven's support with both Priscilla and Lucius, Sane's support with any female character because Sane is just a fucking legend, and of course Aliba's support with Ninian because god damn it, I just think they're the cutest couple ever. Binding Blade comes in second for having no supports that stand out as amazing personally, but I think there are a lot of good ones, and a lot of them are less about backstory, but more about character growth and how they interact with each other. Some of the standout ones were Lance and Alan's support, Chad and Lou's support, Sue and Sin's support, Lilina and Roy's support, Rutger and Clarion's support, and my personal favourite, Milady and Ellen's support. Sacred Stones I find to be overall the weakest support-wise, because like the characters, they're very 50-50, since Sacred Stones does have some really good support, in particular Erica and Seth's support, Gilliam and Serene's support, Franz and Amelia's support, Garrick and Tethe's support, Natasha and Joshua's support, Tana and Ephraim's support, and Colm and Nami's support. But a good chunk of the supports in Sacred Stones really aren't that interesting, and don't really do much to further character growth or go into character backstory. Okay, well that was a lot to cover, but in terms of points, well, I feel Binding Blade comes in last for having not too many strong side characters and a rather weak main lord. I mean, yes, it has the best villains and good support, but the main lord and his army are what matters most when it comes to the characters in Fire Emblem. Sacred Stones comes in second for being very 50-50 in terms of quality, since what Sacred Stones does well with its characters, it does really well, but when it does poorly, it does pretty damn poorly. I still think it's overall better than Binding Blade, since the characters that do well really stand out and are some of my favourite characters in the entire series, in particular Erica, Lion, Seth and Gilliam. However, the winner of this round for having the best lord, side characters, supports and not the best but pretty good villains is Fire Emblem Blazing Sword. Gameplay-wise, all three of these games follow the traditional Fire Emblem formula. You and your team are thrown into a wide open map, with most of the objectives being to defeat the boss and capture the fort or throne. You do this by defeating enemies, using units that have their very own strengths and weaknesses, using the weapon triangle to get an advantage over the enemy, recruiting enemies into allies if possible, planning every move very carefully, using the terrain to your advantage, and leveling your units up in order to increase their stats and so on. The gameplay is very much the same in each game. The only real difference are the unique gimmicks that each game has to make themselves stand out. For instance, Binding Blade has a lot of dragon units that are very difficult to kill unless you have certain weapons, Blazing Sword has you controlling all 3 lords throughout most of the chapters, and Sacred Stones has you dealing with the new monster type enemies that are weak to light magic, so the differences in gameplay are minuscule at best and aren't really worth mentioning. However, level design is a completely different story. In terms of which one is the overall best, I'm gonna have to go with Blazing Sword once again. Blazing Sword has the overall best level design out of all the Fire Emblem games I've played. Each chapter is designed very well for each part of the game. The early chapters start out rather small and in easy open fields, allowing your units the freedom to move around and tackle the enemy comfortably. Later the levels get more complex by throwing more treasure rooms at you, different weather conditions and terrain, as well as making the maps larger in order for you to cover more space and take various different approaches to tackle the enemy. And the last couple of levels throw unique gimmicks your way, like disappearing platform, as well as being the most open-ended maps with various different types of terrain that make it so that you can move in just about any direction with your units and make use out of various different terrain in order to get the upper hand. I'd say around 95% of the chapters in Blazing Sword are a fun time. I mean, not every chapter is incredible or outstanding, but I find pretty much all of them to be a fun challenge, and each level is distinct and has their own unique set pieces or locations. None of the chapters are boring or dull, and overall every level in Blazing Sword is a good time. Except for the chapter Battle Before Dawn. This chapter is a pain in the arse and is often regarded as one of the worst chapters in the Fire Emblem series, since you have to rescue Sophia while in the dark, in a huge map, along with rescuing and recruiting both Nino and Jafar while avoiding the bolting attacks thrown at you and doing it all in 15 turns. Personally, I don't think it's the worst chapter in Fire Emblem history, but it's still pretty damn bad and just so frustrating. Though in the end, it's only one chapter, and the other chapters like Noble Lady of Saison, Cog of Destiny, and Night of Farewells are some of my favourite chapters in any Fire Emblem game. Sacred Stones comes in second, since the majority of chapters in Sacred Stones are good and are a fun time, but a lot of them don't stand out too much and are just kind of there. I mean, while they are fun, a good chunk of them aren't too memorable or leave much of an impression on me after beating them. Also, the chapters in Sacred Stones have a nasty habit of being far too big and often dragging on longer than necessary, which can make exploring all the secrets and hidden areas a bit of a hassle. The rest of the chapters are either really good or really bad. I mean, some of the chapters like Victims of War and Father and Son just suck and I hate tackling them, but other chapters like It's a Trap, Distant Blade and Scorched Sands are really good chapters and I just love going through them. Binding Blade comes in last because, honest to God, not a single level in Binding Blade is anything outstanding or amazing. I mean, not a single level makes me go wow or damn when I play through it, and no level makes me want to play through it again and again. I mean, most of the levels in Binding Blade are decent, and there are a few which are quite good, but again, none of them stand out, and like Sacred Stones, a lot of the chapters are bigger than necessary, and for a lot of them, getting across the map can be a bitch with units that aren't mounted. And since pretty much every chapter requires that you seize the throne or base, getting Roy all the way across the map without using rescue takes ages. Also, there are a handful of crappy chapters in Binding Blade, like Rebellion of Ostia, Heroes of the Western Isles, and Battle in Bolga, since a lot of the time they throw way too many enemies at you, and trying to get across these maps in order to recruit units or save villages is a fucking pain. And of course, let's address the elephant in the room. Chapter 14 of Fire Emblem Blazing Sword, Arcadia. Oh man, this chapter was the thing I was anticipating most about this game. Since when I made my top 15 worst Fire Emblem chapters video, everyone was telling me that this chapter was a million times worse than all the chapters I hated throughout the series. And you know what? Fuck you! Fuck you! You were right! This chapter is awful! I mean, I thought you lot were just exaggerating when you described how bad this chapter was. Why did you have to be correct about this? If none of you have played this chapter, first off, you're all the better for it. But secondly, let me explain why this chapter is so god-awful. Firstly, this is both a desert and fog of war map, which means you can barely move and can't see shit, meaning that mages and flying units are the only useful characters in this chapter, so make sure you've been training those units up or else you're completely and utterly fucked. Secondly, is that there are a fuck ton of enemies that attack you, most of which are Wither Knights, and they respawn very often, which can cause you to die all of a sudden without warning. Thirdly, is that in order to unlock the Gaiden chapter or side chapter, you have to beat this level in 30 turns, which isn't too bad until you realise that Roy can barely move on foot, and trying to rescue him before clearing out all of the enemies is suicide. Fourth is that you also have to make sure Sophia makes it through this chapter alive. And Sophia is complete and utter shit. I mean seriously, she's probably the worst mage in Fire Emblem history. I mean, this chapter is just awful in every sense of the word. And you wanna know what the worst part is? Because I was playing on an emulator, I could use save states to save whenever possible so that when a unit died, which was a lot by the way thanks to that bloody fog, I could simply undo what had been done. I feel so sorry for all the Japanese gamers who played this on the actual Game Boy Advance, since they would have to restart every time if one of their characters died, or they weren't able to clear the chapter within 30 turns. And if that was the case, I would have just fucking rage quit right there. Oh yeah, this chapter is that bad. Anyway, I've ranted enough. Time to wrap this up and move on to the next segment. So the winner of this round is once again Fire Emblem Blazing Sword. Graphically speaking, these games look incredible for Game Boy Advance standards. The sprite work is just incredible and the battle animations are expertly done, especially those awesome looking criticals. The backgrounds are covered in so many little details and the environments are very distinct, colourful and unique. Not to mention the character portraits look amazing and even those sepia tone cutscene images look great. This applies to all three games, so choosing a winner wasn't easy, but personally I think Binding Blade looks the best graphically. This is mainly because it was the first game to make the jump to the Game Boy Advance, and a lot of the sprites and backgrounds are reused in both Blazing Sword and Sacred Stones, but also because I feel this game has the most variety when it comes to the different environments used throughout the chapters in the game, which helps to make every level look at least visually interesting. Some of the best examples of this are the Misty Isles, the Silencing Darkness, and the Truth of the Legend. Also, I know this isn't much, but I love Zephiel's sprite. I mean, holy shit, this is one badass fucking sprite, since it makes him seem just so huge and daunting to the point in which he looks like a fucking Fire Emblem juggernaut. Also, his attack animation is just badass as well, and honest to god, this is the coolest sprite I've seen in any Fire Emblem game. Sacred Stones comes in second for having a lot of different locations used throughout the game, which helps to make each level different from one another, and makes you feel like you're going on a grand journey as you're always seeing new places and new surroundings. And even though the game is guilty of reusing sprites from Binding Blade, it makes up for it by having a lot of unique monster sprites that are exclusive to Sacred Stones, as well as the Demon King sprite, which looks awesome and really makes you feel like you're fighting a literal monster. Blazing Sword comes in last since the game reuses a good chunk of environments from Binding Blade, and there aren't that many unique locations outside of your typical castle, town, field or mountain maps throughout Blazing Sword. I mean, chapters like Night of Farewells and the Pale Flower of Darkness definitely stand out and are really nice to look at, but chapters like that are very few and far between throughout Blazing Sword. Also, the custom sprites for this game are rather limited and not as impressive as the other two games. Yes, even Nagal, the Dragon Boss or the Free Lord sprites. So tough call since they're still some of the best looking games on the Game Boy Advance, but the winner of this round is Fire Emblem Binding Blade. Like with graphics and art style, this was a very tough choice since all of these games have great soundtracks that fit the mood and atmosphere of each game to a T. They're not the best soundtracks in the series, but they're still pretty awesome in their own right. In terms of which is the best, however, I'm giving it to Sacred Stones this time. This is mainly due to the entire soundtrack just having so many memorable pieces of music that are both catchy and engaging level themes, as well as having loads of great character themes like Lion's theme and the end credits theme Flying with the Breeze, which is such an amazing track that I just love to listen to it, and it is one of the best tracks in any Fire Emblem game. The entire soundtrack is just a joy to listen to, and there's a good amount of variety within each song. So while not every track in Sacred Stones is a masterpiece or something to write home about, no track is dull, boring, or forgettable. Binding Blade comes in second for having an overall very solid soundtrack. There aren't too many themes that stick out, but quite a lot of the songs make for very strong level themes, and a lot of the music helps to add a lot more emotion to the situation at hand. The soundtrack is also rather dark and at times pretty epic, especially some of the map themes and the song The Land of the Dragons, which really helps to add to the atmosphere and overall dread that comes with fighting against Burn, and makes them seem just so powerful and imposing. Blazing Sword comes in last since the soundtrack as a whole is pretty good, and some of the character themes like Reminiscence and One Heart are really awesome pieces of music. However, most of the songs don't really stand out on their own, but rather only really make an impact when you're playing the game. Not to say that's a bad thing, I mean that's the whole point of a soundtrack at the end of the day. But when I listen to most of Blazing Sword's music by itself, it really doesn't make much of an impact on me, whereas I can easily listen to both Sacred Stones and Binding Blade soundtrack no problem whatsoever. Also, a lot of Blazing Sword's music is recycled from Binding Blade, which really isn't a bad thing, but it does seem somewhat lazy. So the winner of this round is Fire Emblem Sacred Stones. This was an easy choice. Binding Blade all the way, since it easily has the best boss fights out of all three games. Throughout the entire game, the bosses in Binding Blade are challenging battles that test your skill and force you to use each of your classes to the best of their abilities. And trust me, you cannot simply steamroll each boss with one character. You have to make use out of all your characters in order to achieve victory, and this is what makes the bosses in this game so good, since they really feel like bosses rather than slightly stronger enemies that take more than one turn to take down. Another great thing is that even though the first couple of bosses don't have much personality, once you reach the middle of the game, the bosses become much more interesting characters. This is mainly due to the fact that most of them are generals of Burn, but usually at the start of each chapter, you get to see a short conversation that the bosses have, which helps to add more depth to them and again emphasize the theme of moral grey present throughout the game. Granted, not all the bosses are great. I mean, the final boss in Binding Blade was absolutely pathetic and was a real letdown considering how much they built up to be an amazingly powerful being, but all is forgiven thanks to the fight with Sephiel. Holy shit, this boss fight was awesome! I mean, this fight had everything you would ever wanted from a boss fight and then some. The tension, the atmosphere, the build up and the payoff just make this fight so epic and foreboding. Not to mention, Sephiel himself is a very challenging battle that really forces you to make the best use out of multiple units rather than just winging it with Roy alone. Hell, this guy should have been the final boss since he puts up more of a challenge and was more interesting villain throughout the game. Man, it's Path of Radiance all over again. Blazing Sword comes in second since up until chapter 17, none of the bosses in Blazing Sword are the least bit interesting or put up any sort of challenge. Once chapter 17 the Dread Isles comes around and you face off against Uhai, that's when the bosses really start to pick up. And from then on out, the boss fights in Blazing Sword become proper boss fights, as the bosses are now much stronger and require many turns to defeat with the use of multiple units. Not to mention, the bosses become much more interesting from this point on, since the majority of them are members of the Black Fang, and a good chunk of these bosses have appeared quite a bit throughout the game, which makes the fights against them seem more personal, since you've gotten to know these characters for better or worse. Some of the best bosses in this game are Uhai, the brothers Lloyd and Linus, that evil bitch Sonya, and that dragon boss at the end of the game, who is such an awesome boss fight and is something the dragon from Binding Blade wishes it could be. Sacred Stones comes in last since, honest to god, so many of the bosses in that game are completely forgettable, one-dimensional characters and are some of the easiest bosses in any Fire Emblem game that they don't even deserve to be called bosses. In fact, they barely pass for advanced units. The only bosses in Sacred Stones that stick out are Lion, thanks to the build-up and the tragedy of the battle, and both Kaliak and Volta, since they're actually really challenging bosses and they've been the cause of most of the misery throughout the game, so you cannot wait to take these scumbags down. But aside from that, no other boss stands out in my eyes or puts up any real challenge. Yes, not even the Demon King himself, who hits hard but he goes down really easily, and in the end he felt rather disappointing. Man, what is it with Fire Emblem games and having really disappointing final bosses? So in the end, the winner of this round is Fire Emblem Binding Blade. Concerning difficulty, I'm going to say right now that Blazing Sword completely curve stomps both Sacred Stones and Binding Blade when it comes to the game's overall challenge and level of balance. Fire Emblem Blazing Sword might just be one of the most well-designed, balanced games when it comes to difficulty. From beginning to end, the game is constantly testing your skills and throwing various different challenges and scenarios at you that you must adapt to and overcome. Every chapter presents you with a new obstacle to overcome, in the form of either new enemy types, unique terrain or specific level objectives, so you must always be prepared and ready for anything. Now this may sound daunting, but the game is designed in a way that allows you just enough breathing room so that you can easily adapt to any situation, and simple mistakes won't guarantee death. Every level's difficulty is scaled accordingly, so there's never a level which is either a cakewalk or too hard to handle, except for Battle Before Dawn, but that's just one chapter. I mean, the game is not easy by any means, and if you're not careful, the game will punish you for it. But this game never does anything cheap or unfair, so that any mistakes feel like they're my own fault, not because the game suddenly decides to be a dick, which makes it all the more satisfying when I clear each chapter, since it feels like I earned victory rather than just dumb luck or not having to even try. Which isn't exactly the same case for Sacred Stones and Binding Blade. In the case of Binding Blade, the game is actually rather well balanced in terms of difficulty, since the enemy levels are scaled accordingly and most of the maps give you enough breathing room to spread your team about and tackle the enemy from various different directions, aside from Chapter 14, because that map could go die in a fire. There are just two things that make this game really frustrating when it comes to the difficulty and make it borderline cheap at times. First up are the respawning units. Binding Blade loves respawning units. It loves it more than Awakening does, since in a lot of the later chapters, vast amounts of enemies will respawn at the start of their turn and attack you during the same turn, which means that it's easy to get caught off guard so that they can gang up on your weaker units. Not only that, but because of the amount of respawning units, most of which are Wyvern Knights and Paladins, a lot of the time you'll simply be tanking hits just hoping one of the units doesn't get lucky and land a hit on you. This also doesn't help the fact that in order to unlock a lot of the guidance chapters or side chapters, you have to beat the chapters under a certain amount of turns, and because of the amount of respawning units there are, often your progression gets halted and a lot of time is wasted just dealing with the amount of enemies you have to face. This is also made worse when you have to deal with mages using Sleep, Silence and Berserk from a distance, which pretty much leaves your units open to being slaughtered. And secondly is the RNG, or Random Number Gods. Now, every Fire Emblem game has random numbers that determine whether or not an attack will be successful or not based on the unit's stats and weapons. Occasionally, you will miss an attack or don't avoid an incoming attack, despite the odds being greatly in your favour, and this happens in every Fire Emblem game, but only on occasion or once in every blue moon. Binding Blade, however, has without doubt the worst random number gods I've ever experienced in any Fire Emblem game. Oh my god. The amount of time I would either miss an attack or get hit by an enemy despite having a major advantage was stupid to the point of which it wasn't even funny. I mean, this sort of thing happened at least once during every chapter, and it was really annoying since sometimes it would either lead to my unit's death or because of the damage they sustained, I would have to completely change my strategy in order to keep them safe. I know every Fire Emblem game has those bullshit moments where you miss an attack despite all signs pointing to the fact that you're going to land a hit, but the amount of times it happened during Binding Blade was just stupid. Let me give you some examples. There was this one time where I used Chad, who was a thief, to attack a fighter. Chad had an iron sword with 94 hit. The fighter had a hand axe with 8 hit. Chad missed and the fighter hit Chad. What the actual fuck? Another time was when Milady, who was a Wyvern Knight, missed another Wyvern Knight despite having 87 hit, and the Wyvern Knight hit Milady despite only having 21 hit. And the fact that Milady was placed on a mountain, which gives her plus 4 to avoid, was just plain silly. And to top it all off, there was this one time where Clarine got hit by bolting despite having a fucking 5% hit chance. This type of thing kept on happening throughout Binding Blade, and it pissed me off to no end. By the sounds of this, Binding Blade seems to be the worst in terms of difficulty. Well, actually, I think Sacred Stones is worse, since while Binding Blade has terrible RNG and too many respawning units, the rest of the game is well balanced and challenging, but not too difficult in terms of enemy levels and the map design. Sacred Stones is never too difficult or cheap. Oh no, it's quite the opposite. Sacred Stones is piss easy. Sacred Stones is without a doubt the easiest Fire Emblem game I've ever played. I mean, when it first starts out, the game is actually somewhat challenging, since you have a limited number of units to begin with, and the maps offer a good challenge along the lines of Blazing Sword. They're not too hard or not too easy, and they allow for simple mistakes, but punish recklessness. Once you beat Chapter 8, however, the game's difficulty starts falling like a stack of dominoes, and you can beat this game without even trying. I'm serious, the remaining chapters in Sacred Stones put up next to no challenge whatsoever, and half the time you can go into those maps with just an Iron Sword and Iron Lance, and you can wipe the floor with just about anyone without taking any damage. The only chapter in Sacred Stones I find to be legitimately challenging after Chapter 8 was Scorched Sands, but even then that was mainly for the boss fights, not the enemies. This is made worse by the fact that Sacred Stones has both skirmishes and the Tower of Valny, which allows you to partake in battles in previous maps or in the Tower of Valny, where you can advance through a series of floors that get progressively harder, and you can keep doing this without having to continue the main story. Yes people, you can grind in this game, and if you thought the game was easy before, grinding essentially makes this a game you can beat with just one unit, and the sad part is I'm not even joking about that. I mean, I've got nothing against the tower or skirmishes since they're optional, but it's very easy to abuse these and level the fuck out of your units so they can become stupidly overpowered for the point of the game in which you're currently at. Personally, I only use the tower or skirmishes if I want to either A. Level up a training unit and new recruit who is lacking in levels and won't survive the next couple of chapters, B. Max out a unit who is literally 1 or 2 levels away from reaching their max level so I can upgrade them, or C. Increase support levels between units, but aside from that, I stay as far away from these chapters as possible in order for the game not to become a complete bore. So yeah, Binding Blade may be annoying at times and full of random number bullshit, but Sacred Stones is just too easy at base level and even easier if you go out of the way to level up your team. All 3 of these games will last you about 30 hours for a single run of the main quest, but there are quite a few things you can do after the journey is over in order to get more out of these games. Binding Blade has various alternate chapters you can tackle on a second playthrough, depending on whether or not you've reached them in the original by beating certain chapters under set conditions, like making certain units stay alive or beating them within a certain amount of turns. The game also has trial maps you can tackle, which are often some of the hardest maps in the game. Since Blazing Sword has you start with Lynn's quest and go into Aliwa's campaign, you now have the option of playing through the game, only this time with Hector as the focus of the story and the main lord. Hector's campaign has some levels exclusive to that mode, as well as being the most difficult campaign to tackle. Also, there are various side chapters you can tackle during all 3 campaigns that can reward you with new weapons, characters, or further delving into certain story events. Sacred Stones has a split during the middle of the game that gives you the choice of following Ephraim or Erica, and depending on the pathway you choose, you will tackle chapters exclusive to that lord and view the story from their perspective. Sacred Stones also has a creature campaign which you can unlock after beating the Tower of Valny and ruins a certain number of times, which allows you to face various monsters across many different maps, and you can play as the villains in this mode as well. Personally, I feel Blazing Sword has the best replay value, since playing through each campaign is a great time, and the exclusive chapters you get in either Lynn or Hector's campaign really do add more meat to the game and help to make the campaign its own thing rather than just seeing the story from a different perspective. I also like how the game gives you the option of tackling side quests, since you don't have to do them, but the option's there if you want to, and most of the time it's more than worth it to go out of your way to do them. Hell, the best chapter in Blazing Sword is a side chapter. Sacred Stones comes in second, since even though I have no interest in the creature campaign, and honestly I didn't like it that much, I like playing through the game multiple times since the split path leads to a lot of unique chapters that offer a completely different experience to the opposite storyline. Not to mention, they act as a great way to further either Ephraim or Erica's character development, as well as meet certain characters exclusive to that pathway, like Joshua's mother or Cormac's brother. Binding Blade comes in last since, like with Sacred Stones, I don't care for the trial maps, and even though the alternate maps you can tackle are good, some of the requirements needed in order to unlock them can be rather stress-inducing due to the map size and enemy layout, or trying to keep a unit alive. Some of which are enemy units, which can make keeping them alive really annoying, and the fact that you don't have a choice whether or not you want to tackle the side chapter is a bit silly, and unless you look at the requirement, you're not going to know how or how not to unlock the guidance chapters. So in the end, the game that's worth playing the most again and again is Fire Emblem Blazing Sword. At the end of the day, these are Fire Emblem games. As such, they're all really good RPGs that are easy for anyone to pick up and play, but also offer much more depth and complexity for those who are looking deep enough. Out of the 3, I find Binding Blade to be the overall weakest. I mean, it's by no means a bad game in any sense of the word, but the game really doesn't stand out too much in my eyes. Binding Blade does everything right, and the experience as a whole is a lot of fun, but not too much about the game makes it stand out amongst its brethren. The game certainly has merit, the villains are great, the sense of moral grey is done fantastically, the soundtrack is strong, the boss fights are awesome, but the story and characters are just so by the numbers that it's hard to connect with either of them, especially since Fire Emblem is a series that thrives on strong and interesting stories and characters, and as such the game doesn't leave much of an impression. It's not the weakest Fire Emblem game. By the time of this video, that honor goes to Shadow Dragon, and I still think you should play this game if you're a fan of Fire Emblem, but don't expect this game to be anything outstanding or mind-blowing. Sacred Stones is a very 50-50 game, since there are various elements present here that help to make the game its own unique thing. With all these different elements present, however, the game can't do everything well and falls short on certain areas. For instance, the game is far too easy, the boss fights suck for the most part, some of the characters and their supports are really weak, and not too many chapters stand out. With that said, however, what Sacred Stones does well, it does really well. I'm serious, things like the music, the story, the emotion, some of the characters and their supports are done so well it really makes this game stand on its own 2 feet, and puts it above Binding Blade. Binding Blade might be more focused and consistent, but when Sacred Stones delivers, it delivers in spades, and those elements will leave one hell of an impact on you, and are some of the best things to come out of the Fire Emblem series as a whole. Blazing Sword pretty much gets everything right and offers the most complete, well thought out and focused game out of the 3. Hell, the entire series. Everything from the story, to the characters, to the level design, to the music is done so well and they all complement each other brilliantly. It may not do everything better than other Fire Emblem games, but there isn't a single thing about this game that is cause for major concern, and the game as a whole is just so well balanced and structured that the experience is something I never get tired of doing, and it is a joy to play over and over again. In fact, on a technical level, I find this to be the best Fire Emblem game since it's so well structured and complete with next to no major flaws. Fire Emblem Awakening is still my favourite in the series for more personal reasons, but when it comes down to the experience as a whole, as well as just being a video game, I can say with 100% certainty that Fire Emblem Blazing Sword is currently the best Fire Emblem game ever made, which makes the winner and overall best game of the 3, Fire Emblem Blazing Sword. Thank you all for joining me on this episode of Free For All. I've been Crash6500, and once again I want to thank you so much for all your support and helping me reach 2,000 subscribers. It's thanks to all of your words of encouragement that I keep on going to make the videos that you love, and if it wasn't for any of you, I wouldn't be where I am today, and I just cannot thank you enough for all your support. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Free For All, since this was the first thing many of you requested when I started this series, so I hope I lived up to your expectations. So without further ado, I wish you all a great night, take care, and I'll see you all next time.